to welcome you here today, and particularly to our speakers. We've got a fantastic panel lined up to discuss ways in which we can interrupt this tide of violence that our children are experiencing, and we acknowledge that, and I think these posters are quite a visual reminder of the violent world in which our children live. So we're going to start our session today with Don Pinnock. Thank you, Don. He's from the Center of Criminology. He's done a lot of work in how violence plays out within gangs and ways in which that can be interrupted, and I think that's a great way for us to set the scene for the discussions today. We're really hoping that there will be time for discussions, so I'll talk no more, but I'll ask Don to please come up.
Hi, yeah, this is a bit early for me. I'm basically at heart a journalist. I never get up early. I spent 40 years, I suppose, on gangs and why kids do what they do. So there's not much time to do that. We've been looking at these signs. They're horrific. I mean, they're awful. We shouldn't be living in a situation where those kind of things happen. There were 47 murders on one weekend earlier this year. It's nuts. It's crazy. So I just want to give a snapshot here on what I found, and it's more, almost journalism that takes me into these areas. And just focusing on violence. Now, the obvious thing is that violence is a behavior. It's what people do. It's something they do that they try to relocate the sort of homeostasis of their lives. Now, in digging into why some kids get into trouble and some kids don't, I came across Terry Moffat's stuff, which is quite old now, but it's really good. And she looks at adolescence in two different ways. There's adolescence limited behavior, which all of you have got into in your life. Adolescence calls shit, that's your job, that's what you're supposed to do, because your prefrontal cortex hasn't solidified, and you're crazy. So, I mean, adolescence limited is what you get into. Kids get into trouble, they get out of trouble. The problem is that the kids that I'm interested in are what she calls life course persistent behavior. That is that they get into deeper and deeper trouble. They don't seem to get traction to get out. Now, what causes that difference? Why are some people violent and stay there? Now, I found that it's not really about criminality or delinquency. It's a sort of biosocial cascade of responses to signals that are coming at them, which strengthen or weaken their resilience and their agency in that particular setting. That's a mouthful. But people respond to what's coming at them, and those responses start much earlier than I imagined. And there's a strong possibility, I think, that gangs, they don't only cause, but they biosocially attune to a fierce kind of context. They're very hair-trigger aggressive. It's risky behavior, and that risky behavior is essential for their survival. Without it, they'd probably get steamrolled into the dust or shot. And what I've found they do is they take drugs to feel normal. They kill to stimulate or respond to their dopamine high. They don't have remorse. There's a certain kind of life course persistent personality type almost that's pretty scary, because you're not getting responses off them that you would expect into another process. So it's about resilience, I think, and what undermines resilience. That's where I come from. There's a couple of markers. One of them is early childhood. And, I mean, this is your field, really. There's a lot of problems with early first 1,000 days, pre- and postnatal. The mothers might be taking drugs, they don't have enough food, they're malnourished, the kids end up growth stunted, and the percentages are alarmingly high for that. And if you look at the conception picture, if you have a low-stress pregnancy, prenatal, and a loving environment, the kids could get into life course persistent or adolescence limited, but they're more likely to get into adolescence limited, and they get out of it. The problem with high-stress pregnancies and problems during pregnancy, and then following that, attachment problems with the family, because the family is in crisis, the fathers have left, they're poor. That leads to life course persistent behavior. The other thing that I got into, and as a criminologist I didn't expect to, was into the impact of epigenetic influence on behavior, which is a field I think you must increasingly be knowing about. And there are many debates about this, but it's clear that the situation in which a mother finds herself, or the cell in the mother that will be the child finds itself in, is communicated through the cell walls, and that the RNA process, the DNA to RNA to protein to making a person, is responding to the situation in the moment that is happening. And that can cause a whole range of issues, because really what's happening is that kid is being built in terms of the environment in which the mother is. Now that's a shocking situation. That says that the DNA isn't the book upon which you are made, it's one of the templates, but the epigenetic information is another part of that template. So we have to look after pre- and postnatal nursing brings down violence levels 15, 16 years up ahead. So the kids with those problems have a whole range of issues: poor concentration, low empathy, violence at puberty, and desire for constant stimulation. You probably all know the Dunedin project. It's quite old now, but it was in New Zealand. 1,000 people were followed for years and years. And when there was biosocial stress in the first 1,000 days, down the line, those stress issues linked to those kids turning into, there were 81 criminal convictions, 78 pharmaceutical prescriptions, welfare benefits. Those kids became problematic. So one of the markers for high violence in postnatal, the first 1,000 days, is just unbelievably important. You know that, of course. The absence of fathers was another thing. I talked to a lot of young men, and the overall sentiment for the absence of a father was shame. Why didn't he love me? I wasn't lovable enough. It's not worth it. I'm not worth it. And that gets carried into adolescence and mixes with anger, and that toxic mix of anger and shame explodes out. It's a very dangerous cocktail. And who are the role models of these young people? Are they that? Are they that? Are they that? You know, that's the conception they want of themselves, in a way. It's, they want armor to deal with a world that's not an easy world to deal with. And another thing is another thing that undermines resilience is family dissolution. I did quite a lot of work on the transition from District 6 onto the Cape Flats. And what I found is that District 6 had extended families, lots of people supporting a family. They had verandas, which old people could sit on and police the streets. What happened is, as they were moved into the Cape Flats, the people were put in nuclear family housing. So the extended family broke up into the single. Those became pressure cookers. That family exploded. We now have, what's the percentage, Cathy? It's something like half the kids have been brought up or more in single-parent families. It's very high, but it's disturbingly high. How many kids don't have more than one significant adult around them? And they live in conditions that are unacceptable in terms of how resilience can be built. Education is another issue. I have a lot of problems with education. It's the first moment when a young person is contained within a bureaucratic environment, and how they're going to react to that. They are with the a certain level of support, they'll figure it's worth the hard work to attain the goal, they will persevere. If they don't have resilience, it's not worth it. It's an unattainable goal, they will drop out. And even if you have a matric, you don't get a job these days, so why stay until matric? But my biggest problem with education, just briefly, is that I think it's neck up. It's all intellectual, it's all in the head. We're losing the skills part of education. These things are also brains, and we don't use these enough. All education is aiming here. And I think that the fact that these colleges are not working is a great tragedy. They could be picking up a huge number of kids and providing skills and not. So when I look at gangs, what I end up looking at is youth problems. Gangs are contained within a larger youth problem. Parental stress, parental attachment problems, nutrition, poverty, inappropriate schooling, no jobs. I don't blame kids for getting into gangs. But the problem is, what happens is that we have a situation where there's many guns, and they're gangs, and the gangs are the surrogate families, if you like, of the kids who lose their families. And there's all sorts of gangs. I won't go into details because it's not talk about gangs, but you get kids in gangs for masculinity issues. You get kids in gangs for money. You get local syndicates that are operating like business things. You get girl gangs, which are pretty tough too. But my definition of gang is a group of people who meet together over time, and if they undertake things that are antisocial, they're a criminal gang. Well, with that definition, corporate racketeers, transnational organized crime, state officials, they all fit into the gang. Now, when looking at epigenetic impact on the environment within the first 1,000 days, opens up possibilities for adolescent containment programs. If you understand what's going on in these kids' heads, you can start to work out the kind of programs they need that work with and not against that subcortical hyperdrive, dopamine, excess stuff, and lower empathy and aggression. You can actually put together many of the things that I found in gangs, all those issues that you see. They also, you could actually put those things together and create a program out of them that works, but takes the kids to a different place. That's not part of what I'm discussing here, that's part of something else, which I'll mention in a moment. But if we want to build resilience, those are the things we know we need to do. We need a society that actually holds that process and makes it possible. We have to support pregnant mothers. There was a study in the States of two groups from a similar socio-economic background. One group, the mothers all had nurse visits, the other they didn't. The violence levels were 50% higher where there were no nurse visits, 15 years up ahead. So it's a no-brainer. We can fix these things. And I won't go into prison and drugs and policing. Drugs are a big problem, only in that they run by the criminal underworld, because we really ought to decriminalize them. And I work at Christmas too, and we've put together a ritual passage that actually takes kids using gang process, takes kids into a resilient space. All of that, and this is my last sort of moment, is that I read this book, and which I can sell you for 200 rand, CAC. As a result of that, I got pulled into the province to put together a roadmap for anti-gang strategy. All of the stuff I'm talking about are in that gang strategy. And that has been folded into the provincial crime response, which should be coming out any time now. So this is a document you're not allowed to see because it's not yet released. However, somebody leaked it, so you can, if you want to have a look at it. It wasn't me, I promise. It was actually a drug outfit. Somebody within government sent them the thing, so that might be useful. Probably that's it, I think. Should I keep that there? This book, I brought some along, so if you want them, I'll sell it to you. Okay.
Thank you, Don. And I think he's taken us out of our comfort zone and kind of disrupted our kind of focus on children within the hospital environment and help us understand a little bit of some of the drivers that are both structural and historical, social and economic, but also deeply as personal. And then quite clear how we have a critical moment in which to intervene. Matthew Krause works at the Violence Prevention Urban Operating Project, and they're doing some incredible work to transform the spaces in which children live and create a safer environment and community level. So I just wanted to welcome Matthew to the Cross and the department and Cathy.
Thank you very much. My name is Krause, but very close. I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of how to move from a culture of violence to a culture of peace. And as Nori said, so it's a transformation of space that I want to talk about. I think Don has given the background quite well, so I don't really want to dwell on that. So what I wanted to highlight here is that we are a very unequal society that we're living in. I think everybody knows. And the areas where we work, it's particularly the former townships, have a significantly higher homicide rate than the rest of Cape Town. You can see we're working in Cambridge and Younger and so forth. So that's the space, the public space that we're dealing with. It's a stormwater detention point. You can probably see that all the houses we put there back onto the public space. So it's very unsafe, as you can imagine, and it's unstructured. And that's almost like an illustration what we're dealing with, apartheid's legacy. So you've got the structure, the culture, and the direct violence. And often we only look at the direct violence. I think Don has opened up and spoken about structural violence as well and culture with the gangs. And that's the very same place a couple of years later, the transformation of space through co-design and participation with the local community and working in partnership rather than the top-down approach. So it's about finding those common values that make up citizenship. That's what we're trying to do in the particular areas we work in. Again, different example, housing has been delivered, public space is left over, as you can see. Very unsafe public space. This is the very same space a couple of years later. And you can see it was developed with the community and according to the needs of the community. And what Don just put up, so the small business, entrepreneurship, etc., is actually here built already, social cohesion and so forth. So we're trying to counter the things that make children and young adults sort of vulnerable and receptive to crime and violence. So what we're trying to do is really in the areas where we work to build a social cohesion with fast that builds resilience. Look at sustainability, and it's an evidence-led movement. So if you put those little things that I showed you, those two islands, if you put it together in space, you start to get safe routes, as you can see in that particular case from the transport interchange into a residential area. We're talking about what's called Harare in Kaidicha. It's a neighborhood of about 50,000 people. And the question is sort of, is there evidence that comes out? Those are the official crime stats. It's murder, so the black line is General Kaidicha. And you can see sort of over the last 10, 12 years, we actually had a drop of murder in Kaidicha of about 30%. Hardly anyone talks about that. In the area where we work, it's about double the drop. So it's about 60% reduction. We then had a study done by UCT, Public Health, looking at two questions. And the red line areas are areas where we work, Harare, Krause, and Mobisi Park. And we looked at what's the experience of violence, and is there a difference between areas where we work in a very cohesive and holistic way compared to other areas that don't experience that social cohesion. You can see sort of the red ones is always the areas where we work, and the blue ones is the control areas, the rest of the kind nature. So overall, yes, there's a low risk in the areas where we work. It's irrespective of male or female, and it's irrespective of formal or informal. So it works in informal settlements as well as in formal settlements, so that you reduce the experience of violence in public spaces. We then also looked at the mental health status and whether there's a difference. There is a significant lower level of depression in the intervention areas for women, which is very positive, and residents in formal areas. Didn't work out in informal settlements, but we also have to say there was not such a depth, such a deep intervention in informal settlements, and the general living conditions in informal settlements, also one can imagine, are significantly worse than in formal areas. So looking sort of what is our strategy? So it's a very comprehensive strategy looking at prevention, and that's where you have your life cycle approach. The World Health Organization, ECD, is developing access to employment. It's around cohesion, it's around protection, it's around showing the evidence as well. Surprise, surprise, it's very well linked to the SDGs. Sort of our strategy, which is in the center, centered around SDG 11, but it touches on other SDGs as well. I would like to take you for the next couple of minutes into informal settlements and how it looks like, particularly around early childhood development. So we got sort of certain standards in informal settlements. And one is obviously in each informal settlement we got a couple of water taps and toilets. Now what we developed as a community to simply look after toilet steps and toilets to make them more functional and bring in a better hygiene. Simple app that sort of doesn't really matter when it was, sort of there's an installed functionality, there's a reality that is significantly less than the installed functionality, and then we bring in a simple solution that people look after the water taps and it improves. And that's sort of what you can see. But just look at the numbers, how many people are sharing one water tap. It's about 150 in the ideal world that's installed, but the reality is about 170. Similar thing goes to toilets. Toilets is a little bit better because the city looks better after toilets. Simply done by local people. So that's a simple app, a technical solution. We feel sort of there's more of an adaptive challenge when you go into early childhood development in informal settlements, because there's not enough space to build enough crashes. And the mindset is that you have to have institutional-based early childhood development, which we challenging. We, in essence, saying it doesn't matter where you educate your child as well as the quality, as long as the quality is good and well monitored. And that's pretty much what we're implementing. An out-of-center-based early childhood development program that results in very positive results. So we came up with a scalable model and a partnership approach with the local ECD network. It's aligned to the DSD outcomes. We use Wi-Fi sort of in particular areas so that we get access to data, and it's obviously a job creation for women. It's a very simple intervention built outside classrooms around water taps, so combining the two things, looking after water taps and combining education with that. Obviously it only works at good weather, but we've got a resource center that looks after that and supports with a toilet. Each child is tracked, we've got a unique code, and we're working with the local ECD forum, preparing and training them. So what we were able to do is to have a same curriculum for whole area. So it doesn't matter whether you're working, whether your kid is in an ECD or whether it's in an out-of-center base, you get the same training component. Thanks to the Children's Institute, we had the ELOM assessment the other day. And you can see the white dot is actually the kids that came out of the informal settlements. So the performance of the kids is comparable to the quintile 4 and 5. It's the top point. So again, sort of that reconfirms, doesn't matter where you learn, as long as the education quality and look after the children. So we were very chuffed to get that sort of that the kids are actually can compete with the models in school. Are they ready to go into models in school? Okay, so what are we trying to do? Because I've showed you sort of a little bit of the isolation. So we got in those informal settlements, we got what we call active boxes. Those are places of hope. centralized spaces where government could come in. We've got a very good relationship with the Department of Health that brings primary health care services into the informal settlements because it's a safe space. And part of that is also the ECD Resource Center to support this out-of-center-based program as well as the ECDs. So those are some of the elements what an active black-in-the-box could have. The CRO stands for Community Registration Office, so that you know who lives in the area, and it's maintained and managed by the local community. So the relationship with the post office, so that people can drop off post, etc., etc. You can see that. ECD Resource Center as well. So it's more multifunctional buildings that we bring into the informal settlement. So coming back where I started, the big one was in Kailice that you transform the whole neighborhood through that along this pedestrian walkway. In the informal settlement, which is obviously less resource intensive, those are touching light. You bring in those centers of hope, and then you have an outreach program that basically goes from there. And it's always around safe spaces, ECDs, and out-of-centers for the child. So what are we doing? Sort of if you take it throughout a big settlement, it's a settlement of about 30,000 people in Kailice, then you see that you start incrementally, and you basically can go and have a systemic approach as well. So you start small, you prototype, and then you can scale it. And the ECD program has just yielded the right results so that we can now actually scale it. Thank you very much.
I know Matthew Krause from a previous life. I think it's useful to have a sense of the energy, the possibilities that are out there, the potential allies, because I think very often we feel stuck within the walls of facilities and there is change happening, and we need to be linking up and building on those foundations. I'm delighted to now welcome Cathy Ward. She's based in the Department of Psychology, and she's going to talk a little bit about the constitutional court ban of corporal punishment in the home, and also talk about her work around parenting programs and their potential to transform and make transformation.
Correct, thanks. So Don's given you the wide span of child development, and Michael's told you how we can redesign the urban environment. I'm going to focus in just on one small part of the puzzle, although I think a key part of the puzzle, which would be positive parenting. So I'm going to start by talking about the recent Constitutional Court judgment on corporal punishment. And when I was standing outside with my poster, I chose this poster on purpose because what the Constitutional Court actually said was, if you do this to your child and somebody takes you to court, you can no longer say, I was chastising him reasonably, and get off. So they're saying that this kind of stuff is not reasonable chastisement. It's not reasonable discipline of your child. And in fact, they imply that any form of corporal punishment is no longer reasonable. Now, they didn't actually ban it. They just said that if you go to court and you try to use reasonable chastisement as a defense, then that's no longer allowed, and that in fact that corporal punishment is unconstitutional, and they based most of it on this statement in the South African Constitution, which is that everybody has the right to be free from all forms of violence in public and private spheres. And they also said we always have to consider the best interests of the child. Now, so there's the judgment, and I'm quoting from the judgment. So I want to talk a little bit about what about disciplining children, because that's what positive parenting is really about. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this thing that comes up quite a lot, which is spare the rod and spoil the child. And it's a verse in the book of Proverbs, which Christians and Jewish people depend on, and many Muslim people draw on similar kinds of scriptures as well. And I'm going to talk about what corporal punishment does do, and then I'm going to come back to that verse. So, punishment is ineffective. Now, if you ever spanked a child, you'd probably say it stopped him doing whatever he was doing, but you didn't think in that statement about what's happening in the long term. What happens when you spank a child? You get a really angry child who's very, very upset with you. And what's your child thinking, but not saying out loud? I mustn't get caught doing the bad stuff. If I get caught, I get spanked. So if you do the bad stuff, I mustn't get caught. That's what it actually teaches your child. Don't get caught doing the bad stuff. It's harmful. So it's harmful in a number of ways. One is that we have enough data from around the world about corporal punishment of children, and including corporal punishment of children in South Africa, which says that if you spank a child, they are more likely to be aggressive. So this is one of the pathways to children growing up aggressive. And it's because children, A, get very angry and upset when you spank them, but B, children learn from what they see around them. Children learn from role models. And if you are using spanking to solve a problem, they're learning that violence is a way to solve problems. And they will take that on board and work with it. So that is one of the ways in which it is harmful. Of course, angry parents smacking children, it can very easily escalate into something much more serious, and you will no doubt, if you've been on the trauma unit, have seen one or two children who have been through the more serious form of these things. And I'm going to come back to that probably. And I'm speaking as a person of faith, but I'm not using my own theology here. I'm speaking, this is something that is supported by the South African Council of Churches, the Methodist Church, the chief rabbi, I forget the name of the chief Muslim cleric, but a number of bodies were represented in the Constitutional Court and were speaking against freedom of religion in South Africa. So, what the image that is being used here is a shepherd's rod, not a rod to beat your child. And if you are a shepherd, you are looking after your sheep. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to keep them safe from attacks from the outside. So the rod is there for beating off wolves and other predators. You're not going to beat your sheep, because if you beat your sheep, and if you think about a sheep and its relationship to its shepherd, you want that sheep to come when you call them, because you've got to be able to shear them, and at the end of the day, possibly to turn them into meat. Now, if they're running away from you, you're making your own life a whole lot harder. If you beat them, that's what's going to happen. So actually, what that rod is also used for is for poking the sheep to keep it on track. Just a gentle poke and say, don't move to the left, because if you move to the left, you're going to fall down the mountainside. That kind of stuff. So broadly, what this is saying is we do need to discipline our children. It was never meant to be that if your child is 2, the stick is this long, and if the child is 6, the stick is that long, and so on, which is what one of the churches in Cape Town has been promoting. It was meant to be a reference to discipline broadly and to how we guide our children. So, and the other reason I'm going into that detail is also that parents often say, in response to the notion they're not allowed to hit their children, I don't know what else to do. I don't know what else to do to discipline my child. And there's a whole lot more to discipline. And most parents are usually doing at least some of this, some of the time. So what I'm going to do, I've been part of a group that's been developing parenting programs to prevent violence against children for the last 7 or 8 years. And this is basically our session structure from one of our programs. We use the metaphor of a rondel when we're dealing with Krause families, when we're dealing with Afrikaans-speaking agricultural families in the rural Western Cape. We use the metaphor of a tree because it works better. But the principles are the same, that you want to build a structure that is going to support your child and keep them from deviating too much to the left and too much to the right. You want it to walk straight ahead. The first thing that we do in our parenting program is we set parent goals and some ground rules for the group, and then we move on to spending special time with your child. Now, those of you who are parents, I'm going to challenge you to go home and do this tonight. Spend 5 or 10 minutes with your child. They are allowed to choose what the activity is, and so there are some safety rules. They're not allowed to play in the road or play with matches, that kind of thing. But other than that, you let your child choose what they are going to do, and you play with them. And it can be very hard work because you need to pay attention for 5 or 10 minutes uninterrupted. And if you really do it well, you can move into what we call say what you see, which is things like, I can see you pushing your blue car along the red road. It's going in a straight line. Where's the car going to go next? Not saying, what are you doing? Try this. Not giving commands. You sit back and let the child be in charge. And we've had parents say to us that was absolutely revolutionary in their relationship with their child. If you want some more professional language around that, what it does is it establishes the parent as a reinforcer, somebody that the child wants to be with and who can give out reprimands and praise and will be listened to. So it's quite fundamental in what comes next. One of the other things we teach parents to do is to name their child's feelings. So I can see that you're very tired. Would you like a nap? I can see that you're very angry and frustrated. We have to teach young children to language their emotions. So that as the first stage in getting, of them being able to control their emotions. Because otherwise, they grow up not knowing what it is that they're feeling, but knowing that there's a whole lot of arousal and they don't know what to do with it. So angry, upset, tired, sad. Teach children those words, and it's an important thing to do, and it can be a very calming thing to say to a child, I can see you're very angry. That's the first step to calming both of you down. You can also say, I'm very angry too. That's one of the things you can say. Now, the first thing that you do to get the kind of behavior that you want is you praise the behavior that you want to see. Now, when we were doing this with the folks who were delivering our parenting programs, we would say to them, how's it working for you? And they would say things like, and I'm doing it on my partner too, and home life is so much better. So, let me tell you that if you say thank you for doing the washing up, it's going to get done a whole lot more. I'm making a bit of a joke about it, but it really is strategic. It's very easy to notice your child doing the bad stuff. And we usually take the good stuff for granted. But if you start saying, thank you for getting dressed for school on time, it's going to happen more often. Well done, you ate your broccoli and I know you don't like it. Well done. That kind of stuff affirms children, tells them what you want to see, and really encourage them to do it more often. And you can, if you want to, reward them for doing the bigger behaviors, or if you're having a bit of trouble getting a behavior established, you can say, if you make your bed 3 times in the morning, I'll give you a small reward. You can choose dessert or whatever it is, something small like that. So praise, rewards, really, really good. And now you've got sort of mud walls established. These are the foundations in which you're going to build what happens when we have difficult behavior. So the 2 things that we do to prevent that difficult behavior, that's to give clear and positive instructions. So instead of turning around and screaming at your child and saying, don't shout, say, ask me quietly, and then we'll see. So you're telling the child what you want them to do. And that's the other thing that corporal punishment doesn't do. It doesn't tell your child what you want them to do instead of the bad behavior. So can you see how we're starting to train children in the direction we want them to go? So clear, positive instructions, not the don't, but the do. And then setting household rules and routines so that everybody knows what's supposed to be happening when. We're all out of bed and had breakfast by 7 o'clock in the morning. At 7:05, we're in the car, and we go to school, and then we go to work, we come back, we do homework. Then there's some playtime, some TV time, then we have supper, and then we go to bed. And we're all in bed by 9 o'clock, or whatever the situation is in your house. Having that kind of rule, routine, structure makes children feel safe. It's also maintaining that structure is really important for children who've been through trauma, because again, it makes them feel safe. And children may kick against those rules and routines, but reinforcing it and keeping it firmly but pleasantly there helps children know that there is an adult who is in charge and who will keep them safe. So that's an important one. With children who are young, so sort of 18 months, 2, 3, and so on, temper tantrums are pretty inevitable, and ignoring can be a good strategy with that. It's probably a good idea to tell your child that you're going to ignore them, so you can have a temper tantrum, but it's not going to get any attention, so have a temper tantrum, but I'm going to ignore it. Often gets what we call an extinction burst. The temper tantrum gets worse, before it gets better, but if you can encourage parents just to sit that out, temper tantrums do start to die away. And then you help them ask for what they want. And you say, if you ask nicely, you can have a biscuit, or alternatively, you can't have a biscuit now, but you can have one after dinner. That kind of thing. So ignoring really is better with younger children, and you can also distract them. So if they're starting to do the wrong sort of thing and they're moving towards something dangerous, you use an exciting toy to distract them away from the stove or whatever it is. It's a good way to pair these things together. Time out. Now, when I was being taught growing up as a psychologist, I was taught that time out was where you take the child and you put them in a room where there's nothing exciting for them to do, and it's a punishment. We do that less now because it can be something that also escalates. The first time we did our parenting program, we had a parent who locked her child in the garage for 2 hours. That's not that's really difficult stuff for a child to manage. What it is that you take an opportunity for a parent and a child to cool down. So you say, you're going to sit on your timeout chair, I'm going to sit on my chair, we're going to calm down, then we're going to talk about this. Can we talk about it now after about 5 minutes? Okay, we're going to wait another 2 minutes. All right, now let's talk about it. And it's not over until you've praised the child for doing something right. Thank you for mopping up the spilled milk. Which comes next. So you give children consequences. If they knock over the milk, they get to mop it up. There's no point in wasting any energy over it. Just say, well, you've knocked over your milk. Here's the lappy. Mop it up. Thank you very much. Well done. Consequences, logical consequences. And you can make them a bit longer. If you stay out, I told you to be home by 6 o'clock. If you stay out, this is the third time that you've come home after 6 o'clock, but I say, I'm sorry, there's no TV tonight. You can take away some of the fun things that children like to do, but try to make sure that the punishment fits the crime. Now, all the way through our parenting program, we work on problem solving. So in one program, we can't tell you every situation you're ever going to face as a parent. And what we would encourage parents to do is to think about what are your options for responding to this child behavior, and what are the consequences? Will the child learn what I do want them to do? Will they stop doing the bad stuff? Are they going to be angry and upset? Am I being an effective role model with this? And to think that kind of thing through. And as my colleague Judy Hutchings always says, we may start with child-led play and positive attention. We've got to maintain that sunshine of positive attention all the way through, focusing on what the child does right. And that pretty much is positive parenting in a nutshell. Okay, thank you.
So as you can see, we have tried to form the program with as much as possible as always. So we'll have lots of food for thought. I don't know if we'll have much time for discussion. But I'm delighted to welcome Clare van Westerhuizen. She's based across the road with me and works for Crime. And she is going to talk a little bit about intervention to disrupt patterns of substance abuse.
Thanks, Laurie. Thanks, it's great to be here. As Laurie said, we do interventions for problem substance use. So I'm going to speak to you quickly about screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment for problem substance use, and specifically about a program that was implemented by the Department of Health in 3 emergency centres. So this is the team that's been involved in this project. So I'm going to jump right in and talk about, in 2015, the Premier's Office introduced a number of game changers, and one of them was the alcohol harm reduction game changer. Now this game changer had 3 levers, and including reduced access to alcohol. They looked at things like licensing of beans. They also looked at alternatives, including recreational alternatives. And one of the examples was a hip-hop program for youth. And where we came in was the reduced alcohol consumption for high-risk users. So this is where the emergency department intervention came. The Department of Health had been involved in the randomized controlled trial, led by Prof. Cathy. And then this was implemented in the emergency centres. So the screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment model is not new. It's been around it's been tested since about the 1980s. It's been used in a number of different settings, including healthcare settings, community settings, and adults and adolescents. And over the years, there's been a build-up of quite a good evidence base, particularly for problem alcohol use. When it comes to other substances, the evidence has been more mixed, but we do know that they can be pretty effective for problem alcohol use. Now, these interventions are actually standard and routine care in a lot of healthcare settings, mainly high-income settings, primary care. In the US, a trauma center, which is sort of like our emergency centers as well, but the trauma centers can't be accredited as a level 1 trauma center unless they have a fully functioning program like this. Some of the lower levels, they only mandate that there should be some sort of screening and brief feedback on scores or on risks for substances. So this is the basis of the Teachable Moment program. So I'm just going to walk you through the program itself. We did an evaluation study on the program. As UCT, we assisted with the implementation and we also evaluated it. I'm not going to go too much into the methodology. I want to describe the actual program and then talk a little bit about what we found. So we used the alcohol, smoking and substance involvement screening test. So when we talk about screening, there are really questions we ask. And the assist is a nice tool because it does target a range of substances. So we've got some good data on tobacco, alcohol, and also on other substances. And what it does is it puts people into risk categories for substance-related harms. So you can have those who are low risk or abstaining from substance use. And then we have the risky or problem users. And then the very high-risk users are those who are possibly dependent. So within the Teachable Moment program, when we screen patients, those who are medium or high risk were offered an intervention straight away. Those who are very high risk were also offered a referral to the Department of Social Development for further treatments. So when it comes to the actual intervention, it's 3 sessions, and we call it a blended motivational interviewing problem-solving therapy intervention. The first session is really after screening, giving people feedback on their scores, and then using a motivational interviewing style to build motivation for change and help people think about their priorities in their lives, and also help them work out a plan to avoid substance use or decrease their substance use in the future. So the end goal is not always abstinence. Some people may choose this, but it's really to decrease their problem substance use. And the problem-solving therapy would be the second and third session that we'd offer, that people can come back. And Cathy spoke a bit about problem-solving. This is really just to think about daily life problems and to brainstorm healthy coping strategies. And this problem-solving therapy has been used effectively in adolescents and adults for depression and anxiety. And we also use it in substance users, as we said, so it really can cover a range of issues. When it comes to our counsellors, these were lay health counsellors who really only had a matric. There were a couple who did have further education after matric. But they were trained for about 2 weeks. We used lots of role plays, and we did lots of practice. We also introduced them to emergency centres, gave them a few basic tips, have closed shoes, beware of sharps, those sort of basic things. And then one of the important components of the training was the fact that it's ongoing. So during our weekly supervision sessions, we would practice aspects of the intervention as well. And we had a registered counsellor as a supervisor, Mrs. Megan Poole. And this was a group supervision format, but the counsellors could request individual sessions as well. And it was roughly 3 hours a week. Now when it comes to supervision, this really involved support for the counsellors themselves. The emergency centre environment is quite a hectic environment, and I think a lot of us are quite used to it. But people coming in who haven't worked in those settings, and the one counsellor said she didn't eat on duty for the first month because there was just too much going on, there were too many strange smells. Eventually she got into it, and she was one of our star counsellors actually. But the counsellors really enjoyed this kind of support. So we had the support, and we also had the case discussions, and then we had the ongoing training. So one of the counsellors said it helps a lot because as counsellors we also just need to talk. We also have our things as workers. So it opens a doorway where we can express what is happening. Now I just want to give you a brief idea of the numbers. So in the first year of the program, over 13,000 patients were screened across these 3 emergency centres. Around 4,800 patients were eligible. And these were adult patients 18 and up. It ranged between 20 and 40% eligibility across the 3 emergency centres. And of those eligible patients, over 80% received the first session. Now, I spoke about trauma centres in the States. For many of those trauma centres, their evidence evidence-based interventions I offer are only one session, and the session can range from 10 minutes to about 45 minutes. So that in itself is a brief intervention, although we do have brief interventions that can go up to 4, 5, 6 sessions. Right, when we did a small follow-up study of about 270 people that we phoned, and we found that substance use days were decreased. Substance use scores, particularly alcohol and cannabis, also decreased. Now this was, we didn't have a control group, and it was a tiny sample, but it did confirm the results of the recent randomized control trial. We spoke to a lot of the stakeholders. So we spoke to emergency centre staff, we spoke to Department of Health, Department of Social Development staff, we spoke to counsellors, and we spoke to patients. What was interesting is people who used to work in emergency centres found the program quite acceptable. Some of the emergency centre doctors and nurses said, it's great to see this because we never go to the root cause of violence. It's like putting a bandage over a gaping wound, what we usually do. So this is just a recognition of that it's nice to actually look at one of the drivers of violence in addition to just the treat them and street them approach, stitching up and sending people out. One of the emergency doctors, a lovely quote, he said he was stitching a patient's head wound, and the patient had just come from the counsellor and they said, "Yo, doctor, epigenetic soap survived." Because I didn't realise that I was drinking that much. One of the patients said to us, "Well, that was great because the counsellor gave me hope. We spoke a lot about our life that we live as youth outside, and I shared with her some of the things I was doing before I got stabbed." And one of the counsellors said, people really appreciated just having a space to talk. And I really think that's one of the key active ingredients of these interventions, is someone who's non-judgmental, who's just listening. And we know that in a lot of the clinical spaces, we don't have time to sit and listen. We do have a job to do. We do have a job to look at the medical patient care. So we don't often have time to sit and listen like these counsellors did have the time. So one counsellor said, yes, this lady just knocked on my door and said, I want to come and listen because I heard the people out there tell me that you can listen. And no one else here has the time. So she just came and he said, well, he took the opportunity to screen her, and then they had a good conversation. So my take-home message is that behaviour change is possible. I think for people who are not used to this type of intervention, there are a lot of doubts around it. And for people who haven't worked in emergency centre settings, a lot of people say to us, but everyone there is drank on a weekend, and no one's going to want to talk to you. But surprisingly, a lot of people wanted to share their stories. And also, with our long waiting times, we know there's a burden. Some people actually have time to sober up, and then we have to. So we know that this is feasible to implement with relatively low resources. It was acceptable to participants and to some of the stakeholders. We know we can do this with adults and adolescents. We're currently adapting it for adolescents in community settings. And a lot of these adolescents who screen into our focus groups and study because they're high risk for depression or alcohol use, a lot of them say, well, you think we're distressed, and you think we have problems with alcohol use, you should see our parents. And we think this should be part of a broader strategy. I think this has been a great panel of speakers. We've covered a range of areas. And if you look at the Inspire technical package, which looks at 7 strategies for preventing violence against children, I think we've covered quite a few strategies in this room, which is great. And one of the programs mentioned there when it comes to parent and caregiver support, there was an RCT called Safe Environment for Every Kid model, which involved training pediatric primary caregivers to detect substance use, depression, intimate partner violence, and a number of things in caregivers. And in that RCT, they found that there was about a 1/3 reduction in child maltreatment reports. There were decreased neglect, there was decreased physical assault. So really, not only looking at kids and adolescents, but also supporting parents and caregivers, as Cathy also said, it just goes a long way to improving their safe environments at home. And I think also if we address substance use, they'll also witness far less violence in communities. A lot of community violence, we know that alcohol is one of the key drivers of this. And our kids are really affected by seeing what happens all around them in their everyday lives. Thank you very much.
So I think we've got maybe 2 or 3 minutes for questions or comments.
Thanks for a very inspiring presentation. I positive. Like alcohol and family loss, there's a lot of questions around whether Shabeens could actually themselves be brought into the, even before you get to the trauma centre, whether you can't intervene there. Because alcohol is such a big driver of violence, and it's a lot of the interventions aimed at pregnant women or at safe driving, but those multiple sort of instances of violence around Shabeens remain a difficult area. So there are two questions. Are these sustainable interventions, can they be expanded, and is there anything else one can do on the sort of the alcohol side specifically?
Well, I think a lot of the interventions that we do, and I'm sure some of the parenting interventions, we can train, as you said, people in communities who don't necessarily have degrees. It's great to have someone who's supervising them with a registered counsellor, psychologist, social workers, so that the model could work. So relatively low resources, and I think a lot of these programs are scalable in that sense. When it comes to communities, yeah, I think it's key. We haven't tried going into Shabeens, but I think in community settings it's great. And I think if we have the same messaging in a number of different spaces, I think we're going to start getting traction. A lot of people go home with their booklets and go tell their friends, well, I didn't realize there was a safer level of drinking. You know, if you stick to these drinks, and they're actually spreading amongst their friends and family and taking more booklets with them. So there is a way of spreading it. The Game Changer was great because they actually involved Shabeen owners in the licensing, and sort of, I think they involved the communities as well, and it was more about licensing only certain Shabeens and preventing new ones popping up. So that was quite an interesting model. I don't know too much more about that. But yeah, it's definitely something that can be implemented in a range of different environments. And most people, if you approach them with, I'd like to talk to you about your lifestyle, let's think about your risk factors, a lot of people would be open to it. It does depend on training staff and how you approach people, but I think it's possible.
I'll just add a little bit on that.
Sure.
I mean, taking an alcohol prevention into a Shabeen is unlikely to be successful because we don't have any Shabeen's profits. But we did have a problem when we were doing RCT of the parenting program with some parents not coming because their daily routine was to get the kids up to school and then go to the Shabeen and hang out together. And I suggested we move the parenting program to the Shabeen. I must say my staff were horrified, but we never quite attempted it, but I still think it would be a good thing to do, actually. The other thing I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying is a lot of the interventions are around pregnant women and safe driving and that kind of thing, because those are alcohol industry funded, and it's a way of the alcohol industry saying it's not the drug we sell, it's bad people. And so there is a subtle message in that, which is about we're not selling a drug, and actually our product is safe, it's just these bad people, it's bad moms and bad drivers and all the rest of it. So just be aware of that in the alcohol messaging and the interventions, because those are the areas that they target. Parenting programs, we designed them to be scalable, are as low cost as possible. It does require some skill to deliver them, just like it requires some skill to do motivation interviewing, problem solving. So lay folks, it wasn't meant to the community that we trained, but they do need supervision and they do need training, and that's where the cost lies. But if anybody here would like to be trained, I can put you in touch with the folks who do the training, and they have some funding at the moment to do trainings. They're funded to deliver trainings in the Western Cape for free. So if you wanted to start delivering parenting programs here in the hospital, we would like to do it alongside you together. It's just
we also do training in the screening and the motivational interviewing components. Cathy and our team at the Centre for Public Mental Health, we have done a few trainings for NGOs and around, so we're also open to training.
So I think one of the questions is what do we do as a department, as a hospital. In a sense, what today's meeting has been is really laying it out on the table and presenting a range of possible solutions and strategies that we could build on. Copies of the Rondava will be welcome. Because I think we're being called to respond not just as professionals, but also as patients, as citizens, as members of families and communities. So there really is a need to step up, to speak out, and a lot of the interventions we're looking at the interpersonal level are about care and are about relationships. I think we should probably end here. I know there are other questions, but one of the things we're wanting to do at the end of today is to take the posters outside with us and to do a photo shoot at the entrance of the hospital. The billboards themselves come from the Centre for Early Childhood Development, and they've been collecting them, as you can see, for some time, and they're using them to raise awareness around violence against children. And they will be doing an installation as part of Infecting the City tomorrow. So if you're in town, you're going to find these posters popping up all over the place, and then little handouts if anyone is interested that are here at the front. But I'd really like us sort of as a department to take this forward in the new year. It's certainly an issue we're grappling with in the advocacy committee together with the social work department. And if we have any suggestions on what can be done proactively from where we are with what we have,